The Strix series is usually Asus version of a more fun, enthusiastic, better looking motherboard, yet on a budget. And 2 weeks ago I had reviewed the Prime Z390, its entry level, and we saw a lot of cool improvement. But with the Republic of Gamers Strix Z390-E, we have even more for our money. So without any further ado, let's take a closer look to this better looking motherboard. Alright, so this is not my first Strix, and I absolutely love reviewing them because this is an opportunity for Asus to, as I said earlier, trying to balance really cool gaming features and budget. And there's also a few things that are not on the entry level, such as Thunderbolt and stuff like that, but we have, on the other hand, more focused aesthetical and gaming friendly features. So starting with the obvious, we have here an ATX motherboard, which is 30.5 centimeter long for 24.4 centimeter wide. As usual, it is powered by an LGA1151 socket, which will support both the 8th generation of iCore Intel processor as well as its 9th generation. I usually do not mention VRMs, but in this case, because the 9th generation of Intel processors needs a considerable more amount of energy than its previous generation, we have more beefy VRMs, and that of course means more heat and potentially overheating, and that is why Asus has provided in the package with this motherboard a little fan and fan bracket which will move airflow a bit faster and try to keep this overheating at bay. Memory wise, we have the usual dual channel configuration which can support up to 64GB of DDR4 RAM, overclockable up to 4.266 MHz, which by the way is 266 MHz more than its previous generation, the Z370 powered motherboard. So kudos to Asus for that. But note as well that there are rumors in the market that the Z390 chipset can support up to 128GB of DDR4 RAM with 32GB sticks. So let's see what's gonna happen in the next weeks and months, but there might be a BIOS update which will allow this motherboard to support up to 128GB of DDR4 RAM in dual channel. Let's see. Staying in the memory, this board can support up to 2 M.2 solid state drive, one 11 cm long and one 8 cm long. So here I want to take a second to mention the fact that now the M.2 solid state drive heat shield and the chipset heat shield are two separated components, which is an improvement compared to the previous generations of motherboards such as Z370, Z270, Z170, etc. And that seems like a small detail, but it has its importance. In the past, heat coming from the M.2 solid state drive would be easily conducted towards the chipset, and thermal throttling would be an overall issue or an overall design issue on the motherboard. So yes, it looks like a small change, but it has its importance. As for the previous two generations of chipset, the Z390 is obtained ready, meaning that our M.2 solid state drive can both swap up to 32 gigabit per second. And as I mentioned before, that also means serious heating and possible thermal throttling, and that is why both of our M.2 solid state drive heat shields are equipped with thermopads. So moving upward, we have 6 third generation PCIe Expresses, 3 single bus speed single slot, and 3 16 slots with different speeds. As usual, only the closest 16 slot to the CPU can provide up to 16 full bus speeds. So if you have only one GPU to operate, this is where you want it to be for optimal performances. If you are going for a two-way GPU configuration, the two first 16 slot PCIe Expresses will be sharing their bandwidth, and we will have an 8x8 bus configuration. And in the case you are going to use the 3 16 slots, they will be all sharing the same bus speed, and we will have an 8x4x4 configuration. And because those 16 PCI slots are the most likely to carry the heavy weight of our video cards, they have been metallically reinforced as well. SATA wise, we have our usual 6 SATA 3.0 plugs, which can all transfer up to 6 gigabit per second. IO wise, I want to note that the IO shield is integrated onto the motherboard, and that's again something I love seeing. Asus started to do this with their Z270 Maximus series a couple years ago, and as I used to say back then and I keep saying right now, it's something I want to see more often. It's a real improvement, saves you time, makes it more airtight. It's just an overall win-win, so kudos to Asus to start with this. We have a mouse keyboard PSU connector, 2 second generation USB plugs which can transfer data up to 480 megabit per second, 4 3.1 second generation USB intake, 3 of them type A and 1 type C, which can all transfer data up to 10 gigabit per second. And that is one of the very few improvements we can notice coming from the Z370 to the 390 chipset. We have more 3.1 second generation USB nested into the chipset, which allows us to have more than, the usual 2 second generation 3.1. We can actually have up to 6 of them in this motherboard, and that is something which is quite a lifesaver for like video editing people like me, or even big gamers who have to swap data from a hard disk to an hard disk or USB or whatever. So kudos to Intel/Asus for this one. We have 2 3.1 first generation USB plugs which can transfer data up to 5 gigabit per second, our usual display and HDMI output, our Intel wireless AC9560 which can transfer data up to 1.3 gigabit per second, and again this is the second main improvement that you will see coming from the Z370 chipset to the Z390 chipset. We have a wireless adapter nested in there, which will allow motherboard manufacturers to more easily and more affordably add Wi-Fi adapter without adding their dedicated third-party wireless chipset in there. So again, kudos. So not many improvements chipset-wise, but definitely good ones. Our surge protected gigabit LAN, and finally our usual 5-channel plus optical output. Alright, so time to take a closer look to our onboard connectors. So we have 2 second generation front panel USB connectors right here, which can both transfer data up to 480 megabit per second. 1 3.1 first generation front panel USB connector right here, which can transfer data up to 5 gigabit per second, and a 3.1 second generation front panel type C connector, which can transfer data up to 10 gigabit per second, again a consequence of our chipset upgrade. So far, pretty good. It looks like a very nicely done design and complete motherboard. But of course, as you know, my favorite part of the review is the enthusiastic/aesthetic part of it, and Asus, as usual, tend to pay more attention to their Strix series when it comes to looks and gaming aspect. So in our case, we have 7 fan connectors, 2 of which are also water pump connectors. So if you are looking for a single or dual custom water cooling system, these little motherboards will have everything you need to make it happen. It also have one external thermal connector sensor for accurate thermal monitoring. Now, aesthetical wise, I am in love. It has the very same PCB, the board that the Prime series is using, right? So the one I reviewed 2 weeks ago, the same components mainly, but I have to say the design printed on the board and the overall look and feel of it is absolutely gorgeous. I mean, that is a question of taste and I absolutely love it. One thing we need to note here is that this board is Aura compliant. If you do not know the Aura sync lighting effect, then you should watch the video I've done about that a couple years ago. And in a nutshell, the Aura sync effect will sync all the RGB of your different Aura compliant components in your build so that they can all do like cool synchronous effect together. And on this particular board, we have a very nice Aura/OLED strip hidden under the IO roof, and it looks absolutely gorgeous. And what Asus tries to do usually is to add more than one strip, maybe 2 or even 3 integrated into their board, but I'm kind of happy that they just went for one good quality, good looking Aura strip where it should be. Now, if that is not enough, we also have 2 more Aura compliant RGB connector here and here, and unlike the entry level, we have an addressable Aura compliant RGB connector right there. And that is something I complained about 2 weeks ago when I was reviewing the Prime Z390A. the absence of an addressable RGB connector. So very happy and kudos to Asus for putting it on their more enthusiastic, friendly gamer board. Alright, so this is conclusion time, and the ROG STRIX Z390-E will cost you about $240 before taxes, which is not cheap. But I'll also say that Asus has definitely shown a more detailed approach and a more focused attention onto the performance of this board, and that starts with the VRM heatsink, which are definitely bigger and higher than the one available on the Prime Z390A. It also shows when you have a second M.2 solid state drive heatsink, which a thermopad on the other side, and for the first one it has been separated from the chipset heatsink. And finally we have this included fan and fan bracket to be installed on our VRM if needed. So a real worry coming from Asus to keep this board as cool and performant as possible, even if you are going to push it to its extreme limits. On top of it all, of course, you have a premium build, a premium motherboard, which looks amazingly good. The Aura sync effect has not looked as good on this board at this price point ever. That is my personal opinion. We have everything you need to put, addressable or classical Aura export on it as well. And I have nothing bad to say about it. But, there's always a but, the Z390 chipset, which powers this motherboard, is so identical, give or take a couple of details, is so identical to its predecessor, the Z370 chipset, that I don't see how you'd warrant an upgrade and dropping another $240. They support both the same processors. I mean, one can argue that because of the VRM, if you use a 9th generation i-Core Intel processor on a Z370 chipset, you'll lose some 10-15% performances. But even in this case, I still don't see why you'd have to do that expenditure. So as far as I go, even though this is an amazing product, an amazing motherboard, if you have a Z370 chipset, I wouldn't upgrade it. But if you don't, if you have something previous to the Z370 chipset, dude, go for it. This is the best bang for your buck, the best motherboard, which can range anything from casual gaming to extreme workstation load, and something who can last you a long, long time. And the best performance-driven design I have seen in a long, long time as well, if ever at all. All right, that's my advice to you today. All right.